dated April 1st, 2025.
Yeah.
So very recent.
Wow, just the other day.
That's wild.
It's addressed to the Texas Securities Commissioner, and it's sent from a legal team that's representing Josip Heit and the Apertum Foundation.
Okay, interesting. So this letter is basically saying, hold on a second, TSSB, we've got some issues with your order.
Right. And I think it's important to lay out for our listeners what exactly this is all about.
Yeah, totally.
The TSSB believes that this thing called the Apertum token, or APTM,
ATM.
falls under their definition of a security, and this letter is pushing back hard against that.
Really hard. They're basically saying, no way, no, how is APTM a security?
Exactly. And, for anyone who's really trying to wrap their head around how all this crypto stuff is being regulated.
Which is like everyone these days, right?
Honestly, it's changing so fast.
Right. This deep dive is going to be super insightful.
Yeah, definitely. And, we're going to be looking at why Heit and this Apertum Foundation are so adamant that APTM is not a security.
Absolutely. So let's jump right in.
Let's do it.
What do they say about the nature of APTM itself?
Well, the first thing that really stood out to me was how they define it right off the bat.
What do they call it?
They say it's a native subnet utility token, and it's on the Avalanche blockchain.
Okay, so Avalanche, for our listeners who maybe aren't familiar, is another one of those big blockchain platforms.
Yeah, kind of like Ethereum, they both allow for the creation of these digital assets and all these decentralized apps that people are building.
Got it. And then this term utility token.
Right. So in their view, a utility token has like a specific function within the Avalanche ecosystem.
Interesting. Okay, so it's not just like some random token floating around.
No, not at all. It's tied to a purpose, a use.
Got it.
And then they go on to be very specific about what APTM isn't.
Okay, like what?
They say straight up that it doesn't represent traditional shares in a company.
So you're not buying a piece of ownership.
Exactly. It doesn't give you any ownership stake in anything.
Huh.
And
right.
Super important, they say it doesn't entitle anyone to any kind of revenue stream.
So if the Apertum Foundation makes a bunch of money off this token,
right,
the holders of the token don't get a cut.
Nope, no automatic profits just from holding it.
Okay, so their whole point is that simply holding this APTM,
yeah, just having it in your digital wallet,
doesn't automatically mean you're expecting to make a profit based on somebody else's hard work.
Right, and they connect that directly to the Howey test.
Oh, the Howey test, our old friend.
I know, right? It keeps coming up.
Because it's like the gold standard for figuring out if something's a security or not.
Exactly, and the respondents are saying, hey, look at the Howey test. It talks about investing money in a common enterprise, expecting to make profits solely from the efforts of others.
Right.
We're saying APTM just doesn't fit that bill.
And this is where it gets interesting, because they highlight something from the TSSB's own order.
Okay, what is it?
The letter points out that even the TSSB's order acknowledges that APTM is only deployed through mining.
Whoa, so the regulator itself is saying that?
Yeah, it's right there in their document, black and white.
Okay, so how does that help the respondent's case?
Well, remember that SEC clarification from just last month, March 2025.
Oh yeah, the one about crypto mining.
Yeah, where the SEC basically said that crypto mining activities by themselves don't count as offering or selling securities.
Right, so Heit and the foundation are kind of using that to their advantage.
It's like they're saying, Texas, you agree that APTM is mined, and the feds say mining's not a securities offering, so where's the logic here?
It does seem like a bit of a contradiction.
It really does, and it shows how tricky this whole area is.
Totally different regulators looking at the same thing and coming to different conclusions. And then, of course, we get to the second big part of their argument, which is that there's been no offering or sale of APTM in Texas or anywhere in the U.S. for that matter.
Yeah, they are really firm on this point.
Oh, absolutely. The letter even quotes some public statements from Josip Heit himself, saying they're not selling APTM anywhere.
So how do people get it then?
They say the only ways are either buying it on a third-party exchange, which they have nothing to do with,
right,
or through mining.
Okay, so let's talk about this mining thing, because I think it's really key to understanding their argument.
Absolutely. So to mine APTM, you need to get a mining bot through this entity called DAO1.
DAO1, got it.
And here's the kicker. The TSSB's order actually admits in a footnote.
A footnote.
Yeah, like a little side note,
Yeah.
They admit they're not saying that DAO1 or these mining bots are being offered for sale in Texas.
So it's like they're saying we're not going after the mining part of it.
Right, which makes you wonder, what exactly are they going after then?
That's a good question, right?
Because if you think about it, if the main way to get APTM is through mining equipment that isn't even offered in Texas,
Right.
or through these independent exchanges that they have no control over.
And then it becomes a lot harder for the TSSB to say that Heit and his foundation are directly offering a security in Texas.
Yeah, that argument kind of falls apart a little bit.
It does, and they don't stop there.
Yeah.
They go into a lot of detail about how DAO1 is set up to make sure no one in the U.S. can use it.
Oh, yeah, the geo-blocking.
Exactly. They've got this system in place that blocks anyone with a U.S. IP address from even accessing the platform.
It's like a virtual bouncer at the door saying, sorry, you're not on the list.
Exactly. And then even if someone tries to be sneaky and use a VPN to get around that.
Which people do all the time, right?
All the time.
They say even then, if DAO1's system sees you're using a foreign internet service provider, you can only look at their basic info. You can't actually do anything on the platform.
Interesting. You can window shop, but you can't buy anything.
Precisely. And, that whole know your customer thing, KYC.
Yeah, KYC, where they verify your identity.
Right. They say if you try to submit a U.S. ID for KYC, it gets rejected automatically.
No way. So they're really serious about keeping U.S. users out.
Totally serious. The U.S. isn't even an option when you try to register on DAO1.
Wow. Okay, so all of this is building a pretty strong case that they're not operating in Texas.
It seems that way, but then things take a bit of a turn.
What do you mean?
Well, the letter brings up this whole episode with the TSSB's enforcement director, and it gets kind of strange.
Okay, this is the part I was waiting for.
Right. It's juicy.
Yeah.
So during DA1's transition to a more decentralized system, the letter claims that the TSSB's enforcement director used a VPN.
Wait, so the regulator themselves did the thing they're accusing the respondents of, trying to prevent?
Exactly. They bypassed the geo-blocking, and then on top of that, they didn't even do the KYC procedures.
So they were basically trying to use the platform anonymously.
It seems that way. And even though they skirted all these rules, they still got a free DID NFT and a tiny bit of APTM, just 1.01 tokens.
A D-Date NFT, what's that?
It's a non-fungible token, a unique digital asset, kind of like a collectible. And the tiny bit of APTM was probably just to cover those transaction fees.
Right.
What they call gas on the network.
God.
So the respondents are making a big deal out of this, saying this little airdrop of tokens, especially given how it happened,
Right.
can't be considered evidence of a domestic securities transaction.
It does seem like a stretch to call that a sale.
Exactly. And they point out that the enforcement director wasn't even given a proper deposit wallet on the platform.
Oh, so they couldn't even really use the tokens they got.
Right. And get the DID NFT that the director got. It ended up getting burned.
Burned?
Yeah, basically made unusable because they never completed the KYC process.
Oh, so it's like they were trying to sneak in but got caught.
It does seem that way, and the respondents are using that to say, look, this just shows that there was no legitimate access or engagement in a typical user transaction that would suggest a securities offering.
It's like they're saying, you can't use this one weird instance to make your case.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that whole episode raises some big questions about what the TSSB was trying to do.
It really does.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes their case against the respondents seem a little weaker.
I'd say so, yeah.
Okay, so if they're not offering APTM in the U.S., then where are they offering it?
That's a good question. And they're very clear about that they want APTM to be traded on exchanges that are outside the U.S.
So like international exchanges.
Exactly. And specifically, they're talking about anonymized exchanges.
Anonymized meaning what?
Like you don't have to reveal your identity to use them.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And the point is that if these foreign exchanges aren't doing their due diligence on KYC and anti-money laundering stuff,
Right.
that's on the exchanges, not on them.
They're saying not our problem.
Yeah, they can't be held responsible for how these independent exchanges operate.
Got it. So just because APTM might end up on these exchanges doesn't mean they're the ones offering it as a security in Texas.
That's their argument.
Okay, so this letter also mentions some past dealings between the TSSB and the respondents.
Right. They bring up this order number ENF 23 CDO 1879.
What was that all about?
Basically, there were some previous discussions, and they had agreed on a settlement term sheet.
Okay, like a deal to resolve something?
Exactly. And the respondents are adamant that they followed all the terms of that agreement.
They did their part.
Absolutely. In fact, they go even further and claim that it was actually the TSSB that broke the agreement.
What? How so?
They say that TSSB tried to end the agreement without giving them proper notice or a chance to address any concerns they had, and they did it based on what the respondents considered flimsy reasons.
Wow, so there's some bad blood here.
Look, it seems like yeah, this isn't just some isolated incident.
Right.
This is a history of conflict.
And they mention a specific timeline of communication that makes the TSSB look kind of bad.
Oh, yeah. The letter says that on February 18th, 2025, the TSSB enforcement director told them that Texas was going to be part of this big multi-state settlement.
Okay, so everything was good.
Yeah, and they said they would put any compliance concerns on hold for now.
But then...
But then literally the next day, February 19th,
Wow.
the TSSB suddenly pulled out of the agreement.
What? Why?
The letter doesn't say exactly, but it makes it sound like it was a total shock.
That's a pretty big change of heart in 24 hours.
Yeah, and what makes it even weirder is that the letter says 42 other states and Canadian provinces went ahead with the settlement.
So Texas was the odd one out.
Exactly, and that makes you wonder what was going on behind the scenes.
It does make you wonder.
Makes you think maybe Texas had some other motives.
Maybe this APTM thing wasn't the only issue.
Maybe.
Okay, so let's move on to the question of fraud allegations, or rather, the lack of them, according to the respondents.
Right. They make a big point of saying that the TSSB order doesn't actually accuse them of making any false statements.
So they're saying we didn't lie about anything.
Exactly. And they argue that the TSSB's whole case is built on things they supposedly didn't disclose.
But their counter-argument is that they weren't legally obligated to disclose those things.
It's like they're saying, you can't accuse us of hiding something if we weren't required to reveal it in the first place.
Right. It's a pretty solid defense.
I'd say so. And that brings us to the big issue of jurisdiction, which is really the heart of this whole fight.
Yeah, this is where all their arguments come together.
Exactly. So they repeat their claim that Josip Heit stopped doing business in the U.S. over a year ago.
Okay.
And since they're saying APTM isn't a security and DAO1 isn't accessible to people in the U.S.,
Right.
their conclusion is that they haven't offered any security in Texas.
Therefore...
They say the TSSB has no jurisdiction over them and no basis for issuing this cease and desist order.
Wow, they're really going for the jugular.
Yeah, no pulling punches here.
And they end the letter with a pretty pointed question directed at the TSSB.
Oh, yeah, what's that?
They basically ask if it's appropriate for the TSSB to be using taxpayer money to target a crypto project that's operating outside the U.S., and that they claim is compliant with all the rules.
So they're saying, why are you wasting our money on this?
Exactly. It's a direct challenge to the regulators' priorities.
It really is. And it's a question a lot of people are asking these days about government regulation in general.
Absolutely. Are they focusing on the right things? Are they overreaching? These are important questions.
Definitely. And this case really brings those questions to the forefront.
It does. So just to sum things up for our listeners, this deep dive has been about a big fight between the Texas State Securities Board and Josip Heit and the Apertum Foundation.
Right. The TSSB says APTM is a security and they want to shut it down.
But Heit and his foundation say, no way. It's not a security, and you have no right to tell us what to do.
Exactly. And their main arguments are that APTM is designed to be a utility token, not a financial investment.
And that they've taken steps to make sure it's not offered or sold in the U.S.
And that whole thing with the enforcement director using a VPN and getting a free NFT.
That doesn't look good for the TSSB.
Not really. And then there's the fact that they want APTM to be traded on international exchanges, which are outside the TSSB's reach.
Right. And they say the TSSB just doesn't have jurisdiction over them.
So it's a really messy situation, and it shows how tricky it is to regulate this whole crypto world.
It does, especially when you have digital assets that operate across borders.
Yeah.
And don't fit neatly into the old categories of financial securities.
It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder how individual states can effectively regulate something that's inherently global.
It's a huge question. And this case in Texas is just one example of how these issues are playing out.
It really is. So for our listeners, I want to leave you with a thought to chew on.
Okay, hit us with it.
If blockchain tech and cryptocurrencies are global by nature,
which they are,
what does that mean for the future of state-level regulations?
Right, can they really keep up?
And what's the best way to oversee these digital assets that exist outside traditional boundaries?
It's something we all need to be thinking about because this isn't going away.
It's only going to get bigger and more complicated.
Exactly. So buckle up because the ride's just getting started.
I think you're right about that.
Yeah.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive, but thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.
See you later.
Bye.